how Dr. Fauci ended up doing these gain-of-function experiments. And what happened is that, if you go back just historically, and I'll make this very brief, when I was a kid, so you're going to think this is a long story, but when I was 7 years old, President Eisenhower made what is today probably the greatest speech in America, most important speech in American history, where he warned Americans against the obliteration of democracy if we allow the military-industrial complex to continue to expand, to emerge, and dominate, democracy. My uncle took over as president 3 days later. I was at that inauguration. He spends his 3 years fighting the military-industrial complex, dies. My father runs 5 years later, running against the military-industrial complex, the Vietnam War. He dies during that campaign. And then in 89, and you see the expansion with Nixon coming in and, the military getting more, and contractors taking more and more control of American democracy. In 89, the communism collapses. And we're all told we're going to get a peace dividend. And, that the money that went into that $1 billion stealth bomber that cannot fly in the rain, okay, that $1 billion is now going to go to schools and hospitals and roads and, and healthcare and improving quality of life. And we're all saying this is going to be great. We're going to pound the weapons into plowshares. But there were people in our, who were like listening to that and saying, that's coming out, that peace dividend is coming out of my pocket. So 93, 4 years later, we have the first terrorist attack. And there's a screeching halt. All that money that was headed towards civilian uses now, it goes into terrorism, Islamic terrorism. And it gives us justification to have bases and, 670 bases and countries across the world and all of this, this global hegemony. But Islamic terrorism has a problem because it's hard to justify these huge allocations of our GNP to a harm or potential risk that kills fewer people every year, Americans every year, than lightning strikes. And when the World Trade Center attack occurred in 2001, 3 weeks later, there was an anthrax attack. And our country, first Bush and then Obama, said that, declared officially, official documents, that biosecurity is now the spear tip of American foreign policy. And germs are much more appealing than Islamic terrorism because germs can get into everybody's home and they can kill you. And people have a natural repugnance to germs. And it's easy to exploit that fear to get them to give up their constitutional rights and to turn this into a national security state ruled by the people that Eisenhower warned us against. So Fauci was part of that. That anthrax attack was used as the justification to invade Iraq. It turned out, we found out later, that the anthrax came from one of 3 U.S. military labs. It was somebody in the U.S. military that was associated, and it had nothing to do with Saddam. But the military began, and people who were involved in biowarfare began funneling huge amounts of money into biowarfare. It's illegal. In 72, we signed the treaty. We closed all of our biowarfare labs. Nixon signed the treaty saying we're never going to do it again. We're not going to create them. We're not going to study them. We're not going to use them, and we're not going to store them. Bioweapons. So the military wanted to do bioweapons research, but it was scared to because of the legal violations. And so they started taking this money and funneling it to NIH and specifically Tony Fauci. So beginning in 2001, immediately after those attacks, he began receiving $1.6 billion a year to do essentially bioweapons research. There's a loophole in the bioweapons treaty that says you can do bioweapons research as long as it's what they call dual use. So as long as you can say you're developing vaccines, you can develop bioweapons. And Tony Fauci had a personal stake in this. They gave him a payoff, which is they gave him, when the Pentagon gave him that money, he also got a 68% pay raise that is attached to his bioweapons research. Tony Fauci today is the highest paid official in the U.S. government. He gets $434,000 a year. The president gets only $400,000. It was the next biggest. So, and why does he get that? He gets almost 70% of it comes from his military work. So he is tied. He has a $6.1 billion budget, which is money he just gives away to scientists to do basically drug development. And then he has an additional 1.6 billion, so it's about 7.7 billion altogether. It comes from the military, and that he had to justify by doing these gain-of-function studies. And, at first it was completely unregulated. He really, and I talk in the book about how he manipulated the regulation and got controls of the committee that were supposed to be overseeing him by putting his grantees on those committees. And he began, and then in a bunch of the bugs escaped in 2014, and 300 scientists signed a letter to Obama saying, you got to stop, essentially, Tony Fauci from making any more of these bugs. And that year, he began transferring his studies to the Wuhan lab because the Chinese were welcoming them, and the Wuhan lab is run by the Chinese military. You cannot work in that lab without some association with the Chinese military, and the Chinese military are very frank that what they're doing is weapons development. And so you had all this group of characters, very, interesting, and people like Ralph Barrick from University of North Carolina and Peter Daszak, who had their own self-interest and made excuses to themselves that they were, doing listen, Tony Fauci is saying it out of the corner of his mouth. He's saying we're doing this in order to develop vaccines as countermeasures. The people who know most about this area, like Mark Lipsitch of Harvard and Richard E. Bright and a bunch of others, say there's not a single development that has come out of gain-of-function research that has helped in any pandemic, including this one. It's worthless research. But Tony Fauci himself was funding Ralph Barrick to create these ligation processes where you not only are developing these pandemic superbugs, but you're also developing methodologies for hiding the fact that they were bioengineered.
Oh, the no-see-em edits?
The no-see-em edits. Oh, and the interesting thing about that is, how do you justify them? Why in the world, why is that a benefit to public health? Why, under what basis? And Fauci was funding that.
Right. And you would in fact want the exact opposite, because you would want the ability to at least know when something you had done had caused a harm.